to be the charm. Good afternoon, everyone. I have to get you all ready for Sarah. You know, she doesn't take that non-response part. Good afternoon, and my name is Alita Williams, and I am the president of the Rotary Club of Chicago. I would like to welcome you to our 5,698th meeting. Yay. And with that, we have an amazing speaker today, Joe Ferguson from the Civic Federation. Please honor everyone's time and keep your questions succinct and one question per person. I know our Rotarians have a hard time following that one direction, but we'll try again. All Zoom participants, if you have questions, please put them into the Zoom. And when you're doing questions in person, please wait until the microphone comes to you so that the people on Zoom can hear your question also. And with that, I invite up Eric Kemple to introduce our speaker.
Joe Ferguson was named president of the Civic Federation very recently in December of 2023 and joined officially in January of 2024. Previously, he served as Inspector General for the City of Chicago from 2009 to 2021. Some of you in the room may remember that Mr. Ferguson spoke to us as Inspector General. This was during the COVID years, so it was a virtual presentation. I think it was during my year of presidency. Under his leadership, the Chicago Office of Inspector General doubled its staff from 50 to over 100 employees and expanded the scope of its work, earning national acclaim for its government performance audits and audit-based evaluations, including investigative reports on the city's handling of the aftermath of the murder of Laquan McDonald, the raid of social worker Annette Young, and the city's red light camera system, the city's handling of the 2020 George Floyd demonstrations and civil unrest, the Chicago Police Department's gang database, and fire and emergency medical response time. So a few weighty topics in there. Prior to becoming Inspector General, Mr. Ferguson spent 15 years with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District, where he was chief of the office's money laundering and forfeiture section and a deputy of the complex fraud and financial crimes section, directing cases related to terrorism financing, government programs, healthcare, and financial institution fraud, racketeering, and public corruption, a few things that we sometimes hear about in this neck of the woods. Ferguson teaches at the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy, is a founding co-director and lecturer of the Loyola University of Chicago Law School's National Security and Civil Rights Program, and a founder of ReChicago, a strategic initiative to assess and address flaws in the city's governance structure. Please welcome Mr. Ferguson.
Good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to be here. Thanks for the introduction. I have been before the Rotary Club before in different contexts, except it's not different contexts. In some fashion, listening to Eric provide my introduction makes me realize my entire career has been in preparation for just managing as a person, as a citizen, the incredible complexity of the times that we live in today, where all of our problems seem to pile up all at once, bumping into each other. And in that context, we are all in some fashion, and especially given the mission and service orientation of the Rotary Club and Rotary International, I am sure everybody in the room actually grapples with the challenge of simply keeping up with the waterfall of news, analysis, debate, conversation of numerous realms, much of it being engaged in separate and siloed fashion. And behind it all are questions of systems and systems efficacy. The work that I've done over the years involved a lot of systems analysis, and in significant respect, the Civic Federation, and for those of you that are familiar with the Civic Federation, I apologize for quickly dragging you through this. I know I I heard this morning, this morning, it was still this morning, from Marshall, a little bit of the sort of the origin story of Rotary and its Chicago anchor point, if you will. The Civic Federation is celebrating its 130th anniversary this year. 1894, the same essential generation anchor point as Rotary itself, animated by much of the same concerns and considerations as Rotary itself. Founded in Chicago with what counted at that particular point in time, and that particular point in time was essentially the onset of the progressive era, in which there was a great deal of observation, not just her, but around the country, of the fact that the confluence of business, industry, populations necessary to support them in all sorts of respects meant that cities needed to change themselves in order to meet the challenges of the convergence of population, and a lot of that population being folks that come from really broad and differing backgrounds. And so our sense of what a city was and what a city needed to be, and what a urban-centric region needed to be, was something of high consciousness at the moment, especially at that particular point in time when big business enterprises sort of had a free, unregulated run, if you will, that resulted in lots of externalities that were visited on populations, particularly in a city. A lot of big words, a lot of high conceptual words, but let me ground it a little bit. The founders of the Civic Federation constituted truly diversity at that particular point in time. It's obviously evolved, but we're talking about people like Bertha Palmer, Lyman Gage, business people, civic leaders, but also Jane Addams was one of the founding generation of the Civic Federation, focused specifically on the needs of populations that at that point in time were underrepresented, were voiceless, and also actually needed the support of government. So that perspective of what government was or needed to be in order to meet the complexities of what was then a rapidly complexifying society was the anchor point for the Civic Federation. That is where it is today. The Civic Federation's mission has essentially remained unchanged for 130 years, which is to do evidence and research-based analysis to promote the effectiveness and the efficiency of government. And I am, as Eric's introduction indicates, literally 3 months into the job. And I'm accompanied by Sarah Wetmore, who's the Vice President and longtime Research Director for the Civic Federation, who worked under my predecessor, someone who some of you may well have known because he seemed to know everyone, Lawrence Massall, who elevated the Civic Federation's place in our civics firmament, if you will, on the basis of best-in-class, gold standard analysis of fiscal issues with respect to all levels of government locally. All levels of government locally in a state which has more units of government than any other state in the United States. So it gets also very complex very quickly. In the latter part of my years as Inspector General, where I was for 12 years, an impossibly long time. I don't recommend anybody stay in a position like that for 12 years. They were the longest 25 years of my life. There was something that accidentally came to me that I was embarrassed. You obviously know as an IG, if you're doing your job, you're sort of familiar with the core aspects of how the government or the governmental body that you oversee works, both as a legal matter, regulatory matter, and in some respect as a political matter, even though you are nonpartisan and you do not conduct yourself with consideration of politics per se. It came to me kind of accidentally. As we were finishing off the research and the investigation of the city's handling of the George Floyd demonstrations and civil unrest, which ultimately is a story about failed systems. One of the things that we realized is so many elements, units of government, both within the city and going all the way to the state level, were involved, that we needed to provide a bit of a roadmap to people to what they were and how they all connected up, if they connected up the way that they were supposed to. And I said, let me take, to the staff, let me just sort of take the component of the powers of the mayor of the city of Chicago. And it had been a long time since I had looked at the municipal code specifically to sort of parse what the powers of the mayor were. And I found something very curious. The chapter of the municipal code for the powers of the mayor is very short, so one would expect to be able to hold in mind everything about it. There was a provision in there that was like, hold on, wait a second. There was a provision in there for a position called the administrator of the city administrator. And when you looked at the core responsibilities of the city administrator, you were not looking at someone who did something that you are familiar with in Chicago at all. All of the departments are supposed to report to this one person. This person is supposed to be submitted to the city council. The city council is supposed to confirm them. They're supposed to be in regular conversation with the city council. There's only one problem. That person didn't seem to exist. We looked in the budget for the line item. There was none. We looked to see if there was some proxy for it, like chief of staff. We realized it can't be chief of staff. Chief of staff is simply selected by the mayor. They run things, but they're never submitted to the city council, and it's never been the case that a chief of staff of the city of Chicago has ever appeared before the city council or testified to the city council. So then we did the work to try to find when this was last filled. This was a city manager, basically, in a city that we don't associate with city manager models. And the last time the position had been filled was in the administration of Jane Byrne. It was a mandatory position at a senior level that had behind it a fundamental notion of how the city should work that hadn't been filled for 40 years. And I went around to aldermen to ask them if they were familiar with this position. No one was, except for one person. And when I asked them if they were going to do anything about it, the answer was, well, no, that's really for the mayor to decide, right? Which raises a question of whether we have any system in which there is meaningful legislative oversight, checks and balances, the sort of debate that we really need to elevate our policy making and our decision making. Only one person knew of the position. This was 2021. Anyone in the room familiar with recent Chicago history want to take a guess as to who that person was? It was Ed Burke. Ed Burke was the only person who knew. And I asked Ed Burke, why not do something about it? And Ed Burke said, why would I do something about it? The void benefits me, right? It was a very candid, and it was a sort of an awkward conversation because he was already under indictment at the time and our office had something to do with that, but he was very candid about it. And that, in essence, gets you to what is something fundamental about Chicago that very few people know. So that's what I'm going to talk about. This is something that the Civic Federation has elevated, both in broad strokes last year in its reporting out of options to the new mayor, which is something that it does for new chief executives, and also something that it has done in elemental parts in relation to other substantive analysis and work that it's done. And it's what I was spending the last couple years on once I came to understand that Chicago is distinguished from every major city in the United States. And when I say major, let's just do it from a population basis. The top 25 cities in the United States, Chicago is the only one without a municipal constitution. We refer to those as charters. They're the anchor points, the organizing principles and structure and power dynamics set forth at a constitutional level, and it matters that it's set forth at a constitutional level. Best practice nationally from the National Civic League is that a municipality has a constitution. The municipality gets to decide what form of government that it has. There are best practices for that, though, in terms of positions and the dynamics between those. And it's also best practice to, every so many years, have a commission that re-examines how it is that the governance structure is working and how it's working in relation to the specific population needs and the specific challenges that it's facing. And it is routine in every major city in the United States for there to be a regular cadence of re-examination of governance structure. Chicago doesn't have that at a constitutional level. So our problem is we're the only major city in the United States to operate without a constitution in a constitutionally based country and culture. And because of that absence of rigorous governance structure, we have all sorts of challenges for which there is a strong correlation, and many would say it's a causation relationship. It's seen most particularly with respect to financial deals, things like the parking meter deal. If anyone dips into PTSD as I start to say these, just raise your hand and I'll move on quickly. The Skyway deal, we're selling off basically pieces of infrastructure that are actually revenue generating in and of themselves in order to meet a short-term economic need. And as a consequence, leaving ourselves in a place that no other city leaves itself. More recently, the casino, and the quick mention of the casino is for this. That is one of the sort of the bigger economic development proposals of recent years, and it was undertaken and passed without very much examination. No rigor to it, and we're actually seeing right now a lot of problems around that simply because it wasn't vetted at the front end. We have passed and coming up soon the question of whether or not we're going to build with taxpayer money new sports stadiums. The Bears, the White Sox. The last time that we went through this, we're still paying for that. The structure by which the Bears, the creation of the spaceship inside Soldier Field was undertaken, was from a financing model that means that we still owe over $500 million for that as we're talking about maybe hollowing out Soldier Field and building a new stadium. So taking down what we built while we still owe a massive amount of money on that. With respect to the White Sox, we still owe tens of millions of dollars on that while we're having a conversation about whether we're going to use taxpayer money to build a new stadium. Crime. Our crime problems are actually tied to the challenges of our police department, which are actually closely correlated to the fact that we do not have effective legislative oversight of the police department and the challenges. And we have a reform moment at the same time that we have a crime moment. The city ranks among the most segregated and inequitable of major US cities. Structural budget deficits going back years, which the Civic Federation has been decrying, going back those same number of years. Deeply underfunded pensions, with the cliff upon us, with steep ramps ahead of us, all of which are going to be carried in significant part by the greater shouldering of burdens by taxpayers. All of these have close correlation to the fact that we make bad decisions, which are closely correlated to the fact that we don't have a constitutionally rigorous structure of governance. And there are a couple of rippling consequences to this as well. Chicago, and it depends on which study and which bit of data that you look at which point in time, are we actually losing population or is our population flat? More or less, it's the same thing. I will tell you right now, of the 15 major cities in the United States, only one other city is not at its population peak: Philadelphia. Which brings to mind W.C. Fields, the old saw, first prize 1 week in Philadelphia, second prize 2 weeks in Philadelphia. All right, Philadelphia is not the anchor point, but Philadelphia is actually meaningful. When people talk about Chicago and the fraught moment that we're in and the region is in because of our fiscal situation, our crime situation, we talk about whether we become the next Detroit. We're never going to become the next Detroit. We are not that place. We are too diverse and rich and resourced in so many ways and too centrally important to the whole region to ever become a Detroit or, God forbid, a Cleveland. We might become, and I don't mean that to badmouth Cleveland. Actually, if you look at the downtown, and if you look at a Magnificent Mile, and you look at stores empty out, and the next generation of stores that come in, it's the next step down in terms of prestige and economic sort of impact of chains and stores that come in. We lose the top, and we bring in the second tier and sometimes the third tier. And somewhere between the second and third tier, you realize we're looking at Cleveland right now. And that means a shrinking tax base along with the shrinking population. Now this is depressing, so I'm gonna move on. But we all know this. We all know this, and we don't know why it is that it's Groundhog Day here perpetually, and we tend to tie it to people, and we tend to tie it to politics, but it's not just that. The people and the politics are unmoored from a system where there are standards and there is process that assures that we have guardrails, circuit breakers, so on and so forth, for at least a better level. And one of the critiques, as when I talk about this with people is, well, there's lots of constitutions out there, and tell me one that works really well. And that answer goes to democracy. The second best system devised, we just haven't figured out what the best one is. And so our job and the job of every generation is actually to ask the foundational questions over again with respect in relation to the problems that we face right now. And at the end of the day, people do matter. Russia has a constitution. I don't need to say anything more there. So it's not that constitutions are panaceas. However, if they are implemented and they're conducted in a way where there is sort of a civic engagement on a generational basis and a dialogue about what we are and what we need to be, that's a different dynamic than we see in Russia. So our governance passed, the Cities and Villages Act of 1941, which is a state law which sets the most rudimentary elements of what Chicago governance is. We have 3 citywide elected officials. We have a 50-person city council. The city council decides what their electoral wards or districts are, self-interested. And the single thing that the city council does and must do is pass a budget. There's a few other things in there, but almost everything else is decided at the level of municipal law. And municipal law is determined by those elected officials, particularly the mayor and the city council, which means they're deciding how they operate. We don't tell them how they operate. They tell us how they operate, okay? We all know that's not where we need to be. They represent our interests. They shouldn't be telling us what the government structure is. And that 1941 piece of legislation is significantly modeled on an 1870 piece of legislation, the Cities and Villages Act of 1870. And I mentioned before, best practices for municipalities on a generational, and some it's more often than generational. In a place like Portland, another country heard from. In a place like Portland, it's required every 10 years. In New York City, there is no such thing as an election without amendments to their municipal charter as being referendum questions, right? So it's a constant, and the world moves quickly, and so there should be this sort of constant understanding and kind of meta discussion that we're all having. So in addition to the municipal code, the question is, how is it what's determined as to what our structure is? Basically, we poured the machine as it existed in the mid-20th century into law, and that essentially put us in a world in which the mayor was in charge of most everything, and that mayor was Richard Daley. It's been 70 years since Chicago's even looked at its governance structure. 70. And at that time, it was under the stewardship of the city's stewardship of Mayor Martin Kennelly, who was a businessman who came to be elected mayor with a business background. And his notion was to import business standards and practices and rigor into aspects of the operation of city government. He was following a particularly corrupt regime, the Kelly regime or administration that preceded him, and he immediately preceded Richard J. Daley. So it was this brief window where we were thinking at a higher level. And the time before and I will say that that city administrator position, that was the only recommendation from the early 1950s work of the commission charged by Mayor Kennelly that actually got put into law, and then that law wasn't even enforced. Okay? The time before that was the turn of the 20th century. 1905 is the origin date. It was the origin year for Rotary. 1905 to 1907, we actually had a charter commission, a constitutional commission for the city. The Civic Federation was one of the leading organizations who were pushing for it and actually providing the structure for it, and nothing came of it. So nothing came of it in 1907, nothing came of it in 1952 or 53, and it's 2024. The problems are bigger, the challenges are bigger, and we are all overwhelmed with dealing with the complexity on the basis of the information that comes our way. And so we're not in a position to actually understand most of the time how and why we do what we do. And I'm speaking of Chicago. But as Chicago goes, so goes the region, and as the region goes, so goes the state of Illinois. So how does it work right now? Our mayor is the chief executive. Good. That's how most cities work. But what does it mean to be the chief executive? Here, it means the mayor presides over the city council. He is effectively the president and the speaker of the House in federal terms. That doesn't make sense, or does it? The mayor calls the parliamentary balls and strikes on his own proposals. The mayor chooses the chairs of the city council oversight committees. The city council is the legislature. So the mayor decides who heads the committees that are supposed to be conducting the legislative oversight of the mayor. Corporation council. It's an appointed position. In many cities around the country, that's an elected position. Why? Because the lawyer for the city should be representing the city with us, the citizens, essentially as the shareholders. Not in Chicago. It's mayorally appointed, and although the interests of the corporation are what the corporation council is supposed to be, and actually does tend to, in point of fact, as an appointee of the mayor, the corporation council largely functions as the mayor's lawyer, which isn't the worst thing in the world, except the corporation council is also the lawyer for the city council, which means legislative oversight and legal acumen is coming from the mayor's lawyer with respect to oversight of the mayor. The mayor does all sorts of other things. I've listed these here. This can be shared with everybody. Alita, if folks want this, they absolutely can have it. And that city council, 50 alders. We all have our critiques of the city council. We all have our critiques of the number of alders we should have. People always ask me, how many should we have? I have all sorts of different answers depending on the audience, but that's something that really should be decided by all of us, not by one person. And we have this culture where there's an expectation. It's called, it's the 51 mayor and 50 mini mayor system, and that's sort of a throwback to our machine, and before the machine are sort of ethnic support societies that existed as immigrants came to the city itself, where you look to the elected official, the city councilor, as the person that you go to for all sorts of things that you need within your ward, right? In point of fact, they actually have almost no power and influence to affect the delivery of any of the services that you are talking to them about, unless they're in the good favor of the mayor. And they're also grossly understaffed in terms of having people with policy backgrounds and legal backgrounds necessary to actually not only vet and scrutinize proposals coming from the administration, but also to generate proposals themselves, which is what Congress does, which is what legislative bodies do. All right? So understaffed, over-reliant, and thus routinely subservient. And in fact, historically, the way that you get something more than the 3 people who are your staff as an alderman is to become a committee chair, where you get more staff and then you utilize that staff for that subject matter committee. This is against the law, but it's never enforced. Go back to why constitutions matter. You utilize those people in significant part to help with your ward constituent services. So we don't have meaningful legislative expertise in all sorts of important policy areas. So what's the answer to this? A constitution. All right? Constitution, again, is not a panacea, but it's essentially a contract between the city government and the governed. Creates constitutional level changes in city governance and resets the balance of power and instills permanent accountability. It has to be citizen-driven and approved by the voters. That's the matter of the Illinois Constitution. That's best practice generally. We decide what form of government. But the reason that constitutional level change matters is this: the rules can't be ignored, and they can't be changed on the fly. To disregard a constitutional provision results in opening the door to a citizen filing a suit called mandamus action that would have a government actor being directed to do what they're supposed to do under the Constitution. So that city administrator provision that I was talking about, if that was a constitutional level position, somebody could say, hey, it's been 40 years, you have to do something about that, right? Whether that's the thing we want to do or not, that's open for discussion, right? But there is no enforcement mechanism of any sort with respect to how we've set up our government at the municipal level. And so the rules can't be changed on the fly. I'll give you a quick example of the rules being changed on the fly. I'm going to go back to the casino. So the casino, what happened was the prior administration didn't say we want proposals for the location of a casino at 1 or 2 places. They just put it out there for proposals. And we let interested parties decide where in the city they might be interested in having a casino. And they submit a proposal on that basis, and it comes to the administration. The administration largely decides, okay, we want this one. Here's what happened. Our chief executive, who is our president and also Speaker of the House, created a special committee in the city council constituted of the chairs of the legislative committees that had previously been selected by the same mayor, to create a special committee to hold one hearing to approve a casino winner. And that's what we ended up with. All the studies that you would have wanted to go into this ahead of time, not done. And when they were done, we handed them off to the winning bidder to do the studies, without the expertise within the body to actually closely scrutinize the studies as they were done. And that's why we have this very, very mushy, ambiguous situation that we have with the casino. I'm not picking on the casino. I have my thoughts. Other people may have their thoughts as well. But it's only to say that process matters, standards matter, the balance of power matters, legislative checks and balances matter. We don't have that. Right now, what we are seeing, because we have what is essentially a weaker mayor than we are used to in the city and in the area, is a city council that is actually exercising more voice and asking more questions. That's a great thing. Whether we should do it with 50 people, who knows, right? We should have that discussion. But here's the problem. The city council, in asking those questions, are still reliant upon the good graces of the administration to provide them with real answers and the underlying information. Why? Because both as a matter of municipal code, although there's some arguments at the state level contrary, but at the municipal code level and customary practice, the city council only gets to see what the administration decides the city council should see. Which means even in asking all of the critical questions around all sorts of things, at the end of the day, there isn't rigorous vetting. And that lands, finally, in the place that I'm going to land, because I see Alita with the microphone pacing the back of the room, and I know intuitively what that probably means. That lands most critically from a Civic Federation perspective in how we go about budgeting. And again, I will share this, but you could see all of these cities have constitutions, and you see that the citywide elected officials are different. The forms of government vary, but I want to focus on New York City very briefly. They have an elected comptroller. We don't have an elected comptroller. I noted that we have an appointed corporation council. We have an appointed comptroller. And we also have an appointed budget director and appointed chief financial officer. That means the person, that means basically in the control of the mayor is the person who tells us how much money we have, gives us the projections of how much money we have, and decides how we should spend that money. It's all together. It's all merged and mushed into one thing. Those are different functions in some measure in other cities for good reason. The budget process here in Chicago, it's a multi-month process, but actually so far as there is critical engagement of the city council, the legislature, it is an incredibly compressed, crabbed, information-starved process that occurs over the course of 3 to 5 weeks, practically speaking, okay? Here's what happens in New York. New York, they have an independent budget office established at a constitutional level in their charter. That is an office of 45 to 50 truly professional financial analysts that are vetting every form of legislation. They're scoring legislation that has any significant financial or budgetary impact, okay? So in New York, there is a 5-month, 2-stage budgeting process that would look like what we think Congress does, but there is sort of year-round aspect to this. Stage 1, all of the components under the power of the mayor have to submit to the city council basically an accounting for how the current year is going. What money is being spent, what money is inadequate, what money is being well spent, where we're not hitting our performance metric marks, and imagine that performance metrics around actual government programs, we tend to be starved of those. But it goes to the city council sends it to the independent budget office, the independent budget office independently scores it and sends it back to the city council, and the subject matter committees have hearings with the relevant department heads. And what we do is we're level setting. Where are we right now? Where are we relative to what our objectives were at the last budget and going back years? We do that level setting. They finish those hearings, and stage 2, I'm getting the signal. Stage 2 is those same departments have to send their budget proposals for the upcoming year. And the city council gets everything that it wants for that. And the budget office gets everything that it needs to analyze that. And it all goes to the independent budget office, which really is independent, and then back to the city council, scored, and then we have budget hearings. Just a quick data point on our budget hearings. I worked with a group of graduate students at the University of Chicago doing a comparison of budget processes. In Chicago, our budget hearings are about the only time in the course of a year that most commissioners actually testify before the city council, and most aldermen actually see the commissioner. And in our budget process, and this is where we did some counting, we discuss the budget for 12% of those hearings. Most of the time, it's a lot of proper carping about things that are needed at the ward level. These are subject matter committee hearings. So we're not talking about the budget. Did a comparison to Los Angeles. Los Angeles, you get the same sort of questions about why something's not happening in my district and so on and so forth. But over 70% of the budget hearings are devoted to actually talking about the budget, finance, debt. We don't do that, okay? All of that is tied to a constitution. We all need to be thinking in bigger terms about why we are what we are, why it is Groundhog Day, and whether we ourselves need to do something to elevate the notion that government of the people, by the people, should be determined in the first instance from the people as to the form of government we need. And in all of this, in a sense, sort of changing the way our relationship with government and how we think about government, empowering ourselves to engage a government that is less mysterious, less opaque, more understood, for the objective of a continual improvement model with all of the necessary feedback loops, not only to overcome our long-term structural challenges, but to actually meet the opportunities of the future.
Great. Thank you very much for that. We'll open the floor up for any questions. Questions in the room? Oh, Jim?
So you mentioned that the mayor has concentrated power. He's weaker now, so the city council has more concentrated power than they maybe had before. How in the hell is this constitution or this charter ever going to get any legs under the circumstances that we're under now? Because I am completely dubious that that's ever going to happen in this great city of Chicago.
That's tongue-in-cheek, by the way.
And with good reason. Our history, first of all, our history is one that leaves most people unaware of how Chicago is distinguished in this way in the first instance. We don't even have the terms and the concepts in our general narrative and in our general civic discourse, right? And two, behind your question is the basic essential observation of these parts, which is how do you get people with a vested interest in the way things are to actually take their hand off the checker and allow them to be different? And that is where the cliffs that we're facing and the ramps that we're facing really start to matter. Because I think everybody gets, we are the most taxed, people who live in Chicago are the most taxed in the country, all right? Noted that we have more levels of government or components, units of government in Illinois than just about any state in the union. Everybody knows we are as corrupt as any. But those cliffs, those fiscal cliffs immediately in front of us, and this burgeoning awareness that if we do not do something different, we're going to become Philadelphia. That can't happen. It can't happen. It actually matters too much to the United States that Chicago gets itself together. There's a couple ways of going about this. One is a referendum from the people to start to establish a commission. That's a mess because that involves politics. A second is it comes from the city itself and the mayor. That would take a visionary mayor that actually, is thinking not in terms of doing the right thing right now for the future. It requires a mayor that thinks that way rather than the potential of being another 20-year mayor, which we're never going to see. The third way is actually from Springfield. And Springfield says, and that's downstate, saying Chicago is off the rails. That's the Collar County saying Chicago is off the rails. That's actually legislators from the city of Chicago saying we're off the rails. And there's a lot of that quiet conversation that happens. So then the question is, what is the moment that actually makes it politically feasible? It's not feasible this year, not with the Democratic National Convention coming, not with the question of presidential politics hanging over all of us, but also with a governor who actually thinks in those terms as well. But on the back side of it, if there aren't substantial changes in terms of how the second budget of the Johnson administration comes forward, which is the first true real budget that is post-COVID, post-ARPA, post sort of Band-Aid of that era, fiscal Band-Aid of that era, where the cliffs are really there, that's the moment when actually this conversation could happen. Am I hopeful? Does it matter if I'm hopeful? No, it doesn't matter, because that's the work that needs to be done regardless.
Alita, how much more time do you want? One more question. Chuck, I saw your hand go up. You still have it?
All right, I guess.
Wait.
I'm Chuck Roby. Thank you for your presentation. I'm blown away, actually. It's a lot of new things that I hadn't known about our city at all. So you're in your 3 months or 6 months? 3 months.
3 months.
Feels like 6.
That's not a good
that's
thing.
not a good thing. I know, sorry. So I've lived in Chicago now for about 6 years. I've been coming downtown my entire life. I lived in the suburbs, but I don't see how we can keep digging ourselves down into the mess. And your input, your approach, I think, with some of the reform ideas are excellent, I think. But where do we start? I mean, how do you start coming off that, but back on the rails? Let's say a slow segue into and then back on the rails that you're suggesting. Where do we begin?
So it's a good question. It's a hard question. The previous question was basically how are we going to scale a sheer cliff? Your question is there some sort of ramp that gradually gets us to where we need to be? And the ramp is that a lot of the things that would go into a better governance structure for Chicago are reforms that actually can be made in the first instance at the municipal code level. That means they can be undone. But when we talk about a moment where there is a weaker mayor, and there isn't a concentration of power in the city council, I just want there is chaos right now, is what there is. Okay, and that's what happens when long-time power is simply removed from a situation. You go through a period of chaos. And the answer is that there are a lot of best practices that can be done at a legislative level, and that's where the Civic Federation work sort of circles back around. It is the comparative analysis that says this is how things actually are done elsewhere that work much better and that need to be done here in order to comport with at least better practices, if not best practices. That is actually in the consciousness of the city council right now. It's not effectively being marshaled, but it's once you do it in one place, you lower the barrier to entry to doing it in the next place. And it's incremental. And then we can have the question as we start to change those things from people doing education and civic engagement to say, look, all of these tie to something much bigger that we need to be talking about as well. But it's basically modeling the behavior in smaller bites. And there are lots of reforms that can be undertaken, especially in both the budgeting area and in the public safety area, that starts to get us on the road.
Thank you. Oh, just a second. Waiting for my screen to come up. Well, we have a wonderful coffee mug for you today, and then you also get some cookies in the mail from Al's Cookie Mix. Alvin Green started a cookie company, and to help his son and their friends who have autism to have jobs once they age out of the CPS system. So, I hope you enjoy. Thank you so much.
Can I just very quickly say, civicfed.org. Go and see some of the work that we do and reach out to us. We're easy to find for conversations. And thank you for all of the work that you all do here and in the region and around the world. We have to all get into the pool together, and I appreciate the Rotary International and the Chicago anchor point for it all. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, since we are running short on time, I want to say thank you for all of our wonderful guests. Thank you, Patrick Burns, for bringing some guests today. All of our wonderful visiting Rotarians, if you all could please stand up and wave. All my visiting Rotarians, thank you. We'll do a flag exchange after the meeting. Still try to get us out on time, which is going to be not possible, but we'll make it happen. Job one, we need employers. We started training with our students this afternoon, last Saturday. It was awesome with our new curriculum, and they got books and handouts. It was totally amazing. They were really excited about being there, so I can't wait to get them placed with some wonderful employers this summer. So if you all know any great employers that would like to be a part of the program, Jim Buick in the back is one of our star employers for Job One. So if you need anyone to tell you about how great that program is, Jim will, see, there it is. And we have a fundraiser for Job One this Thursday. It is free at the Irish American Heritage Center, but $1 from every beer and $1 from all food purchase will go to Job One and to Project Owen. So please come out and join us and help us raise some more money for Job One. And this Saturday is our district conference, so we would love for people to come out, learn more about what we do in our district and in 6440. There's going to be amazing speakers. There's a continental breakfast, a lunch, and a reception afterwards. So come spend a wonderful day with your other Rotarians and learn how you can help grow and improve our great club. Next Tuesday is our fellowship luncheon, and since the person we're doing something for isn't here and he's not on Zoom, it is not really, it's fellowship, but it is a surprise baby shower for one of our members, Andrew. He is having a baby girl in June. It's their first baby. His wife is coming. She thinks he's getting an award. I've done all the things I can do. So today the piggy banks will be, if anyone would like to give some money for us to buy him a gift from the club, please put money in the piggy banks, write a check, give Shannon a credit card, whatever you would like to do for that. But please come out and help be a part of that. We have a cake coming and everything. It's going to be super awesome. He has no idea what's going on. So it's a complete surprise. We're not even going to post this meeting until after that meeting, so he can't hear it. So please come out. Please support, and I hope you guys can come out and support one of our great members in their first baby. And on April 30th, we have Commissioner Glenn coming in to speak about unlawful discrimination in many areas, so I'm sure that's going to be a wonderful conversation with many questions. We have Rotary Means Business the first Monday of every month, in which I am actually the president of that too, so like I didn't have enough to do. We'll be meeting at Cafe Chow at 5:30, which is on Sangamon and Madison downtown. And we have our entrepreneurship series with Jetta Bates, which will be held at Marshall's Law Office. Thank you very much, Marshall, for hosting us there that day, in which we'll talk about the great ways to be an entrepreneur and working with global companies. If you would know, if you want any great speakers that you want to see here and you have connections, Eric, raise your hand, let Eric Kemple know so he can go out there and get those wonderful speakers to us. He does a lot of this work on his own, but many members have gotten together and given him ideas. And now it's up to you guys to help us keep up the great work. And on May 14th, we have our annual Women of the Year. It's 11th annual, so I'm so excited. These are the wonderful women that we are going to recognize for the great work that they do in the city of Chicago. And they are not Rotarians yet, but we will get them in. And so we also have sponsorship levels for our event: advocate, leader, trailblazer, and a visionary. If any of you all would like to be a sponsor for Women of the Year, Shannon can help you out with that. We have our wonderful roundtable every Friday, in which normally Ted is there and Steve is there. I try to come every now and then, but we have a great time. Betsy and Wes come out, so it's a really great opportunity just to get some members in. Meet some members and talk about, and we tend to get a lot of international Rotarians that come out and meet with us. So, volunteer opportunities. Community Service Committee, we have the Blues Kid of the Year coming up in June, the Jesse White Trunk Party in July, Spectrum Sailing, and I'm trying to run through it. Sorry. And Still Point Theater. These are great opportunities. You can reach out to Sarah and Wes and find out how you can be a part of these amazing service project opportunities. We have our normal volunteer opportunity every Wednesday. Look at me and Meredith having a good time making 200 salads. So please come out. That's every Wednesday. And the dictionary project is back. Please get with Wes Westerfield to help give out dictionaries to third graders in CPS schools who are super excited to get their first book. And we have the amazing, all of you approved International Service Committee grants, and I'm sure this is only about half of them because they do so much work. And we have actually just become sister cities with the Bolivia Club, so that's very exciting. And donate to the Rotary Foundation and the Rotary One Foundation. That's how we do all the great work that we do. Without your donations, it doesn't come back to the club so that we can continue to do all of the service projects for Community Service Committee and the International Service Committee. And that's the QR code for the gyrator. If you have not received it or you would like to be on that list, please let Shannon know. We always are looking for more members of committees. And with that, I'm going to invite my very favorite Rotarian, Jim Buick, to come up here and lead us in the four-way test. You are always my favorite Rotarian, no matter what.
The four-way test, repeat it with me, is it the truth?
Is it true? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? And number 5, will it be fun? All right, and with that, I adjourn this meeting.
Thank you, miss.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. Appreciate it. President, I will follow up with you guys. Series of
Is everything here? It was fantastic. Thank you very much.
Talk to either Martini or Zach.